The morning my stepbrother showed up at the ER, I had a fractured wrist, a bruised sternum, and a heart that hadn't stopped breaking for 72 hours straight. 3 days earlier, my boyfriend Marcus and I had lost our baby. We'd been trying for 14 months. 14 months of ovulation tests on the bathroom counter, of holding my breath every time my phone rang, of whispering prayers I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. When the pregnancy finally held past 8 weeks, we let ourselves hope. We told my father. We bought a little stuffed elephant from the store on 5th. And then, at 11 weeks, it was over. Not with drama or fanfare. Just gone. Like a candle someone quietly blew out in another room. The D&C was routine. A same-day procedure, a few hours of recovery, and then home with instructions to rest and take it easy for a week. Marcus had barely left my side. He'd set up a little station on the nightstand: water, crackers, the TV remote, a book I hadn't opened. He was sitting in the chair beside the hospital bed, still in yesterday's shirt, when my stepbrother Kyle walked through the curtain like he owned the place. I hadn't called him. I hadn't told anyone on that side of the family about the pregnancy, let alone the loss. "How did you even know I was here?" I asked. Kyle didn't answer that. He never answered questions he didn't feel like answering. Instead, he looked around the room the way he always looked around rooms, calculating, pricing things out in his head. Then he looked at Marcus. "Can you give us a minute?" Marcus looked at me. I gave him a small nod, and he stepped into the hallway, though I caught him positioning himself just outside the curtain where he could still hear. Kyle pulled the one chair close to my bed and sat down. He was wearing a blazer, which meant he'd come straight from the office, my father's office, technically, though Kyle had been running things for the past 2 years while my father's health declined. "Dad's not doing well," Kyle said. Not as a way of opening a conversation, more like a move in a chess game. "I know," I said. "I talk to him every week. He's getting worse. The doctors are adjusting his medications again." He paused. "We need to talk about the house." I blinked. "What about the house?" "Diane thinks it makes more sense for us to move in and handle things directly. Full-time care. It would be easier for everyone." Diane was Kyle's mother. My stepmother. She had married my father 6 years ago, after my own mother passed from an aneurysm that came without warning and left without explanation. Diane was polished and soft-spoken and had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I had spent 6 years trying to give her the benefit of the doubt and 6 years quietly failing. "Dad has a home care nurse," I said. "He has me. He doesn't need you moving in." Kyle's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Claire, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. My father is ill. He is in his own home with professional care and his daughter nearby. What exactly is unreasonable about that?" "You're not nearby. You're 40 minutes away. And you're an hour and a half away, so I'm not sure what your point is." He stood up. Not angry, Kyle never got visibly angry, which was somehow worse. He straightened his blazer. "Dad mentioned updating his will," he said. "I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page before decisions get made." He left without saying goodbye. He didn't acknowledge Marcus in the hallway. I lay there with my fractured wrist and my empty belly, and a cold feeling spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with grief. Marcus came back in. He sat on the edge of my bed and took my good hand. "He's your father's stepson," Marcus said carefully, "not his biological child. Can he even contest a will?" "He's been working for the company for 4 years," I said. "He knows everyone on the board. He's made himself indispensable." I stared at the ceiling. "And Diane has my father wrapped around her finger." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "We're going to need to pay attention." That was an understatement. My father's name was Robert, and he had built his financial consulting firm from nothing over 30 years. By the time I was born, it was a real company with real employees and a reputation for honest, careful work. By the time he got sick, it had 15 full-time staff, a solid client base, and a CFO position that Kyle had somehow slid into like a key into a lock. The illness had started 2 years ago. Fatigue first, then the heart irregularities, then the slow cognitive fog that his doctors attributed to his medications. He was on a complicated regimen: blood pressure, drugs, antiarrhythmics, a low-dose blood thinner. I was a pharmacist, which meant I had opinions about his prescriptions, and I had expressed those opinions to his cardiologist on more than one occasion. Something had always felt off to me. Not wrong in any way I could point to, clearly just off, the way a piece of music sounds when one instrument is slightly out of tune. His levels were inconsistent. His good days and bad days didn't follow any pattern I recognized. I had flagged it, his cardiologist had reassured me. I had gone home and worried quietly and told myself I was catastrophizing. I wish I had pushed harder. After Kyle's hospital visit, I started going to my father's house more often. Not 40 minutes away, I was rearranging my schedule, trading shifts with my coworker Priya, driving up on weekday mornings when Kyle wasn't likely to be there. My father seemed glad to see me, if a little tired. Diane was always around, always gracious, always finding reasons to be in whatever room we were in. It was Bev who first said it out loud. Bev was my father's next-door neighbor, 73 years old, retired postal worker, and the most observant human being I had ever encountered in my life. She had a little yappy dog named Pretzel and a habit of deadheading her roses at odd hours, which meant she was outside at all times and saw everything. One morning in late October, I found her at the fence while I was leaving. "Your stepbrother's been here a lot," she said, not looking up from her roses. "I know. He's been bringing medicine." She clipped a dead blossom, carries it in himself, doesn't go through the nurse. I stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "That nice nurse, Linda? She usually handles all the medication, gets it from the pharmacy, checks it, logs everything. But twice in the last month, I've seen Kyle come in with a bag and go straight upstairs. Linda wasn't here either time." Bev looked up then, and her eyes were very sharp. "Thought you'd want to know." I drove to my father's house that afternoon and sat with him for 2 hours. We watched an old movie and he laughed at a joke he'd already laughed at the last 3 times we'd watched it together. When he dozed off, I went to the kitchen and found his medication log. There were 2 entries with Kyle's initials. I photographed every page. Marcus was the one who said we needed to be systematic. He was an architect by training, which meant he thought in structures and load-bearing points. Find what's holding the whole thing up, and you understand the whole thing. "We need to know what's actually in those medications," he said. "We'd need a sample," I said, "and a reason to test it that doesn't tip anyone off." "You're a pharmacist." "I'm a pharmacist who can't just walk a patient's personal medication into the lab without documentation." Then we document it. He was already on his laptop. "Your dad's cardiologist, Dr. Ferris, you've spoken with him before. What if you called with a professional concern, asked him to run a full panel, framed it as a medication review?" I stared at him. "That could work. If I frame it as noticing inconsistencies in his response to the antiarrhythmic, which I already believe. I picked up my phone. Dr. Ferris was cautious but willing. He ordered a full blood panel with medication levels the following week. I made sure Linda administered it, not Kyle. I drove my father to the appointment myself. When the results came back, Dr. Ferris called me before he called my father. "Claire." His voice was very careful. "Your father has elevated levels of digoxin in his system. Significantly elevated. He's not prescribed digoxin." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. "Someone is giving it to him," I said. It wasn't a question. "That appears to be the case." A pause. "I've already contacted the hospital, and I think you should contact the police." I didn't call the police immediately. I know how that sounds. But I needed to understand the scope of it before I handed it to anyone else, because once I handed it to someone else, I couldn't control what happened to my father in the meantime. So Marcus and I went to the house on a Tuesday morning when we knew Diane had her book club and Kyle was supposed to be at the office. My father was with Linda in the living room. We went upstairs to what used to be the guest room and was now being used as a kind of secondary office by Kyle whenever he stayed over. The laptop was closed on the desk. Marcus opened it. It wasn't password locked. Kyle, it turned out, was not as careful as he believed himself to be. What we found took 20 minutes to read and another hour to fully absorb. There were emails between Kyle and a woman named Terry, not Diane, not anyone I recognized, discussing the sale of a block of company shares that should have required board approval. There were spreadsheets showing fund transfers I didn't immediately understand, but which Marcus, who understood financial structures the way I understood drug interactions, went pale looking at. There were files with my father's will, the old version, which left the company equally to me and a charitable trust, and a new version, dated 4 months ago, which left controlling interest to Kyle. And there were emails from Diane. They weren't love letters. They were logistics. He's getting more suspicious. We need to move the timeline up. The cardiologist appointment is next Thursday. Make sure Linda isn't there. Once the transfer goes through, we can accelerate the rest. Marcus photographed everything. His hands were steady. Mine weren't. How long? I asked. He looked at the dates on the earliest emails. At least 18 months. 18 months. My father had been declining for 2 years. They had started, by the look of it, before the decline became obvious, setting the stage while he was still well enough to sign documents they put in front of him. Patient. Methodical. I thought about the Tuesday mornings Diane had greeted me with coffee and asked about my job, and I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Detective Reyes was not what I expected. She was small and precise, and asked questions the way a surgeon makes incisions exactly where needed, no more. I sat across from her at the precinct with Marcus beside me and a folder of photographs between us, and I watched her read through everything without expression. "You understand this is a serious accusation," she said finally. "I understand that someone is poisoning my father," I said, "and has been doing it for at least a year and a half." She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. It moved fast after that, the way things do when they finally move. Dr. Ferris provided the blood work. The pharmacy record showed no prescription for digoxin under my father's name at any pharmacy in the county, but Kyle had purchased digoxin under a different name at a pharmacy 2 towns over, 6 months ago, and the transaction was traceable. The financial forensics team found 3 years of embezzlement from the company's operating accounts, small amounts, rerouted through shell accounts Kyle had set up using Terry, who turned out to be a bookkeeper he'd hired 18 months ago specifically for this purpose. The will turned out to be the sloppiest part of the whole thing. The notary who supposedly witnessed my father's signature had been out of the country that week. When investigators showed my father the new will, he looked at it for a long time. "I never signed this," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I don't know where this came from," he cried. I don't think I've ever seen my father cry before that afternoon. We were sitting in his living room. Linda had made tea, nobody was drinking, and he held that forged document with shaking hands and kept saying he should have seen it sooner, he should have known. "You were being poisoned," I told him. "Your thinking wasn't clear. That was the point." "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I just didn't know what. I kept trying to figure it out, but the fog..." He shook his head. "I thought I was just getting old." The digoxin causes cognitive impairment at elevated levels, confusion, fatigue, visual disturbances. They had been clouding his thinking deliberately, systematically, while they moved his money and rewrote his legacy around him. I held his hand and didn't say anything for a while. Kyle was arrested at the office on a Thursday. I wasn't there. But Priya called me because one of the firm's clients had already messaged her about it. Apparently someone filmed it on their phone from the parking garage across the street. Kyle had walked out in handcuffs looking at his shoes, and I was told he said nothing. Diane was picked up at the house by Detective Reyes personally. Bev saw the whole thing from her garden. She called me immediately. "There were 3 squad cars," she said, and I could hear Pretzel barking in the background. She kept asking if she could get her coat. They let her get her coat. Very civilized. A pause. "Pretzel is very worked up." "How's my dad?" I asked. "Linda's with him. He's okay." Another pause. Softer. "He asked me to tell you he's proud of you." I had to pull over to the side of the road for a few minutes after that. The treatment took 3 months. Once the digoxin was out of his system and his real medications were properly managed and monitored, my father's improvement was steady and remarkable. The fog lifted. The fatigue eased. He started doing the crossword again in the mornings. He started asking pointed questions about the company's finances, which was how we discovered that Kyle had not been working alone inside the firm. One of the junior accountants had been processing the fraudulent transfers and was now cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. Marcus and I moved into my father's house temporarily during his recovery, not because he needed us to, but because it felt right. We ate dinner together most evenings. Bev came over on Sundays. My father taught Marcus how to play cribbage, and Marcus let him win, which my father absolutely knew and appreciated anyway. One evening in February, my father asked about Marcus and me. About us, about the future. We were sitting on the back porch and it was cold, but neither of us had gone inside yet. After everything that happened, my father said carefully, "I don't want you to wait on things." "We're not waiting," I said. He looked at me. "We have an appointment next month," I said. "A specialist. We want to try again." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and put his hand over mine, the way he used to when I was small, and something had frightened me. "Good," he said. "That's good." The trial lasted 11 days. I testified on day 4. I sat in the witness box and answered questions about the medication log and the blood panel and the photographs we'd taken from Kyle's laptop, and I kept my voice even the entire time, which I had not been sure I would be able to do. The defense tried to suggest that I had a financial motive to discredit Kyle, that I wanted full control of the company, that the poisoning narrative was constructed to undermine his legitimate role in the firm. My father's attorney dismantled this efficiently. The pharmacy records were not constructed. The forged notary signature was not constructed. The 18 months of wire transfers were not constructed. Terry, who had pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of financial fraud, testified that Kyle had approached her specifically because she had prior experience helping a previous employer obscure transactions. She cried on the stand. I'm not sure it was genuine, but it didn't matter either way. Kyle received 12 years for aggravated assault with a toxic substance, fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The judge noted that the premeditation was extensive and that the targeting of a vulnerable person in declining health was a significant aggravating factor. Diane received 9 years. She was convicted on the same charges minus the direct administration of the digoxin, which could only be tied to Kyle. Her attorney argued she had been manipulated by her son. The jury took 4 hours to disagree. I didn't feel triumphant when the verdict was read. I felt tired in a way that went all the way down. Marcus put his arm around me in the gallery, and I leaned into him and thought about the 11 weeks when we had believed things were going to be different, and the 3 months of watching my father come back to himself, and the Sunday cribbage games, and Bev's roses. Some things you lose and don't get back. Some things you fight for and do. The company is doing well. My father brought in a proper interim CFO after Kyle was removed, a woman named Patricia who had previously run the operations side of a mid-size investment firm and who had, in my father's words, absolutely no patience for nonsense. He went back to the office part-time in the spring. Not because he needed to, he has plenty of people handling things, but because he said it felt important to show up. I understand that. Marcus and I got married in June, in my father's backyard. It was small, 40 people, a tent, Bev's roses cut and put in mason jars on every table. My father danced with me to the song my mother had loved, and he didn't cry, and neither did I, and we both knew we were thinking about her and didn't need to say it. There are days I still get angry. Not at Kyle. Exactly, Kyle made his choices and is living in their consequences. More at the version of myself who saw the fog and the inconsistencies and the way Diane always positioned herself just outside my conversations with my father, and who told herself she was overthinking it, who was afraid of being wrong, who was afraid of making things difficult. My father could have died. He knew, I think, in some quiet part of himself, that something was wrong, that the confusion was not just age, that the exhaustion was not just illness. But he trusted the people around him, and they used that trust like a tool. I think about that sometimes when I'm filling prescriptions at work, checking interactions, running the numbers twice. The systems that are supposed to protect people work because someone pays attention, because someone asks the question that doesn't have an obvious answer, because someone decides that being wrong and looking foolish is a better outcome than staying quiet and finding out too late. I kept the little stuffed elephant. It's on a shelf in the room we're getting ready, just in case. Marcus painted the walls a soft yellow. We haven't bought much yet. We're taking it one step at a time, the way you do when you've learned that hope is something you have to protect carefully. But the elephant is there, waiting, and so are we.